First visit in Israel?
No, I've been here many times. I grew up here.
Oh, really? Where?
In Carnation Road. So a little bit away from here. When I was very young, that's where I lived.
And when did you leave to the States?
When I was about 6 years old, so I lived here between the time I was 4 years old and 6 years old.
So no
and it is embarrassing how bad my Hebrew is.
Can you tell me a bit about your current job at Bird?
Yeah, so I'm the Vice President of Government Partnerships. So my job is to work with cities all around the world and make sure that we have a true partnership.
So, like San Francisco mayor, not very comfortable talks lately. New York mayor, how are your relationships?
I would say actually really good in both cities. So San Francisco was a city that I would say we got off to a rocky start. We're in really good shape right now. So I think we'll have
He answers your phone.
I think we'll have some good news out of San Francisco over the coming days and weeks.
Okay.
New York is a much harder city because it's a city that is very nervous about new modes of transportation. So they are very nervous about electric bikes. They're very nervous about scooters. The mayor is, trying to be helpful, as are the other officials, but there are a lot of old laws on the books that they need to get rid of first.
So you're helping them?
Yes.
Okay. So, how did you get to being VP at Bird?
I worked in government for many years. So I
At the US?
worked in the
In the
United
US.
States. I worked for the State Department for many years, working on all sorts of issues. The counter-ISIS campaign, the crisis in Syria. So obviously that led me to Bird. Very natural
So crisis in
connection.
Syria, Bird. Yeah,
Exactly.
I can see the connection.
Exactly.
Okay.
So-
San Francisco, New York. Crisis.
Exactly. So at some point, I decided, I'm sure you've heard the news. There's some different things going on in the U.S. at our federal government level, and I thought, okay, now's a good time to go into the private sector.
What about ISIS? Are we going to be okay?
It's gonna be great.
Okay, we can go. So let's talk a bit about Tel Aviv. How many birds in Tel Aviv today?
Our fleet size varies, so we tend to say around 3,000.
And with the competition, can you estimate how many scooters?
Are in Tel Aviv itself?
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably under 10,000 scooters.
Wow. So a year ago, there were none.
A year and a half ago, there were none anywhere. And now we are all over the world. And of course, Tel Aviv is such an impressive market. It's one of the places that is leading in terms of multimodal transportation. But it's really exciting to see. I mean, it's really changed how people get around.
Yeah, it has. So let's talk a bit about you. Where was the most unique place you've ever ridden a bird in? A city, a country?
I mean, the answer is obviously going to be Tel Aviv.
And now for the real answer.
Well, we're in some of the best
The
cities.
Vatican.
I would say we're not yet in the Vatican. We're in some of the best cities in the world. So Tel Aviv, Santa Monica, Los Angeles. We're about to be in Chicago. Obviously, we're in Paris. All over the world, and now beginning to think about Asia and increasingly in Australia. So it's a very exciting time.
So will you ride with a kangaroo from
Exactly.
half a year from now?
Exactly right. And I love Tel Aviv, but the streets here aren't always the smoothest paved streets.
No.
So having a vehicle that
And
has
we don't have bike lanes, so...
although actually much better bike lanes than I would say in other cities across the world.
Really?
Yes, but you can always have more. And when you think about a vehicle, a scooter, what you want is one that has very solid tires, that has that durability, that is shock resistant. So that's what we've been spending our time on. And I think you're going to see our vehicles continue to get better and better. And we're very excited about the vehicles we're bringing to Tel Aviv because it's going to be the safest scooter on the road.
Okay, but now back to the future kind of answer.
Well, if I
Wings.
could do anything, it would be wings.
Wings.
It'd be nice to be able to fly on a scooter.
So, Uber, we know that they are working on kind of things like that. Can we
Expect that someday soon there will be some flying scooters. You heard it here first. This is an exclusive. I'm going to say at some point, sometime in the future, date to be determined.
So this is something you should tell Tel Aviv Mayor.
Yes.
He should be ready for flying
Yes.
scooters because I think he wasn't ready for bird scooters. I actually know that you fell on them one day they started looking around and seeing scooters. They didn't know what this is. It took them a couple of weeks to understand this thing they're seeing. And how are your relationships now?
Well, so actually I would say, when it comes to scooters in general, this has been our experience around the world. Has been that when we first started, we sort of thought, okay, maybe this will be an interesting way for people to get around. We didn't realize how transformative it would be. And in part, it's because traffic and congestion is such a major problem in any city. I mean, you think about Tel Aviv, and you think about Israel, I think the second worst congestion in the Western world, right? I mean, it is just terrible what cars have done to our cities and how unlivable it's made our cities. And so scooters have really been transformative. And when we brought scooters, I don't think anyone expected that people would take to them and ride them and replace their car trips with them and use them to get to work. And it's just really been an incredible thing to see that happen.
Can you estimate how many car trips have you replaced in Tel Aviv?
So we estimate that during weekday hours, we've replaced 40% of car trips that are under 3 miles. And that's looking at something like 90,000 car trips.
Which mayors are you going to meet on this trip, or have you met already into Israel?
Well, I think we'll see what kind of meetings we have during the time here. But in general, I would say that we're very lucky to have really good relationships, not just with in Tel Aviv, with the city, but I would say at the national level as well. And I think across the world, it's one of the things that we do particularly well.
So they all want to meet you?
You know, gotta find the time to squeeze them in.
Okay, and what do they tell you in these meetings?
I think that city officials in general want to be certain that the scooters that we're bringing are going to have a positive experience for an entire community. And that means riders and non-riders. And so we spend increasingly a lot of time thinking about the non-riders. What is the experience of someone who is walking down the street? And how do they feel about the scooters they're seeing? You know, we've gotten so used to cars that we forget how much of our road is taken up by cars, and we've sort of squeezed everyone else, all the pedestrians, anyone who's taking any other form of transportation off to the sides.
And now you are coming and taking more space of pedestrians.
Well, I would say actually it's kind of similar to the way that people use bikes or the way that they use other forms of transportation. If you're not in a car, you're stuck on sort of the margins of the road. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is people reacting to, well, where is the space for everyone else? And so how do we make sure that pedestrians feel very safe when they're walking down, that you don't have, whether it's bikes, whether it's scooters, whether it's other forms of multimodal transportation. Increasingly you see these crazy skateboards and all sorts of things. Yes, and pogo sticks. But how do you make sure that pedestrians have a good experience and that those multimodal forms of transportation, which are so important for cities to be livable, are not inconveniencing pedestrians?
So how do we make sure?
All sorts of ways. So this is what we spend most of our time on. You asked me how I start my day. So this is what we spend most of our time thinking about, is how can we come up with more solutions around good parking? How can we come up with more solutions around good behavior on sidewalk riding? Part of this is education of riders.
So you believe it should be sidewalk riding and not road?
It depends on the city, actually. So some cities require it, some cities do not. But no, in general, I think that the best place in a city like Tel Aviv, it's ideal when you have a bike lane, something of the sort. Otherwise, they should be on the road. You have a few cities where it's actually required that people be on sidewalks, which is a pretty funny thing. And then you have
birds on the sidewalk?
All scooters.
All scooters are required to be on sidewalk?
Required. Right now, that is state law in Florida, for instance.
Okay.
Every city in Florida, we actually worked with the state to pass a bill that just passed in Florida. We're waiting for the governor to sign, to specifically say scooters should be on the street, not on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
because
makes sense.
Yes.
He has children, the mayor?
I actually don't know about that.
Let's say my 15-year-old daughter, how can you make sure she won't ride a bird?
Well, so a 15-year-old would not be allowed on a bird, and we have all sorts of measures.
If she's not allowed, she won't do it.
Yes, exactly. So we have all sorts of measures around that, including verification when you sign up on the app, including things like preloads, which actually help us discern who is underage or not.
Like license, driver's license?
Yes, sort of. We do all sorts of verification around that. So we have different ways that we do that kind of verification. And then the other thing that we do that is actually quite different than a lot of other operators in the industry is we limit the unlock. So when you unlock a bird, you're taking your phone and you're finding the app, you're unlocking that bird. We limit the unlock to one vehicle. And many other operators allow you to unlock an unlimited number of vehicles.
Okay.
And what happens is oftentimes we have seen that they're unlocking vehicles
For their children.
So part of what we are trying to solve for is human nature. And that is a very difficult
Good
thing.
luck in that.
And you think about any industry, you think about cars. How do we solve for people who might want to speed? We have law enforcement that will ticket people who are not behaving properly. How do we solve for any other kind of bad behavior? We have enforcement. So I think one of the things that we're trying to make sure we find a good balance, and we talk a lot about this with our government partners, is where is enforcement the right answer, and where is additional technology and education the right answer?
You know, let's talk about working in a company that is worth $2 billion. So what's the coolest thing that happened since you were worth zero, now that you are $2 billion? You know, you've got a pool, I don't know.
We don't have a pool. We're way too practical.
You're flying to Brazil for a company.
You know, actually, I actually think we do have a pool. It is
I've never seen it.
It's a pool for vehicles so that you can water test them to make sure that they can endure the rain and the various elements. No, not the kind of pool we're thinking about.
Okay, so what's the coolest thing that happened to you working at a company that grew up from 0 to 2 billion in 1.5 years?
Honestly, it's our global reach. It's really the most exciting part, is where we can be. Because what is that money? I mean, it's a valuation, but what is the money that goes into the company? What does it do? It allows us to build much better vehicles. It allows us to then distribute those vehicles much more widely, have a team that can work with cities to make sure that we're partnering with them, and then be all over the globe. And it's just really exciting to see everything from, you know, being in Mexico City to being here to Europe to the Americas. Now we have, you know, we're doing stuff in Canada, we're doing stuff in Australia. It's a fascinating time.
So you're flying around the world.
A little bit. I am pregnant now, so that travel has slowed down a little bit.
Okay. And the travel on bird slow down a little bit.
Travel on bird slowed down a little bit.
Good thing. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, I hope you have a good visit here in Israel.
Thank you.
And a very successful one with Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, Givatayim, all over.